Welcome to EcoFactors, a podcast from the Atlantic Wildlife Institute on Canada's East Coast. We sit down with people doing the real work and the communities pushing back against development that doesn't make sense for us or those we share the environment with. We are united with our guests from everywhere in honest conversations about what it actually takes to protect the earth that we call home.
Good afternoon. Wow, it's afternoon already, Jim. Everybody, this is Jim Emberger, and he's from the New Brunswick Anti-Shale Gas Alliance. And Jim is going to be doing an update for us on the Energy Utility Board RIGS hearing, although I don't love calling it RIGS. I prefer to call it the Big Dirty Gas Plant in Tantramar. Yeah, the BDGP for short. And we are here. I'm here at the Delta Hotel in Moncton, and we're halfway through day 2. Jim, how are you today?
Doing fine. Listening in via Zoom to all the proceedings.
Good. Well, thank you for taking this interlude out of listening and out of your day to give us an update on what's happening so far. So, do you want to start with, I guess, what is the Energy Utility Board hearings? Why are we here?
Well, the Utilities Board is a semi-judicial proceeding, is a hearing open to the public, and it is specifically geared towards obviously the energy and utilities, and it also has a very specific mandate concerning having to decide what is best for the NB Power ratepayers and citizens of New Brunswick, and when they make decisions for rates or anything else, in this case, adding new equipment, are those decisions prudent, given the guidelines of their mandate. Now, that has its drawbacks too, because it's a very narrow body of very narrow body of evidence that they'll take. If it doesn't have to do with the ratepayers and the prudence and all like that. For instance, we aren't arguing climate change in this. That's a separate process that has to be argued, with the EIA that is being done. But anyway, so who's involved in it is there's a board with a chairman, a 3-person board with a chairman, and the interveners, who are the people who volunteered. They want to get into the examination of evidence and the ability to cross-examine New Brunswick Power and other expert witnesses. And so they're allowed in the room as well, along with, of course, all the people from NB Power whose project this is.
And so there's a 500 megawatt gas plant. Actually, it was a 400 megawatt gas plant that was being proposed for on the Chignecto Isthmus, which is that little piece of land connecting Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, which is highly acclaimed internationally for all of its biodiversity and wetlands and importance. It's very significant to Canada and the world. But that is where NB Power chose to propose this plant. And then just last week, they added on another what they're calling the expansion of 100 megawatts in addition to the 400 megawatts. So now we're going to call it a 500 megawatt gas plant, although this particular week is only to talk about the 400 megawatts because we have bifurcated, which is a nice fancy word that we heard from John Fury, NB Power's lawyer, to separate the 100 megawatts. And then now we have a whole new hearing back and forth with interrogatories and questions, et cetera, that takes us to April 1st and 2nd as the new suggested date for that hearing. Just to give you an update on that, what are we doing here? Why does NB Power have to be here? Why do we all have to be here?
Here. Well, why we have to be here is, I guess, just explained in the definition of the board that I just gave you. But why the specificallys is that originally NB Power just wanted to go ahead with this project without any oversight. Normally, they have to go through any kind of decision like this has to go through the board if it's going to be more than $50 million involved. And this is going to be way more than that, but they said because of this weird accounting structure that they were using, that it didn't really qualify as their asset. So a lot of expert witnesses and the board itself said, no, that's not true. You got to come through the process. That's why we're here now.
And let me just clarify too, that part of the reason, part of their accounting was because this plant would be built, owned and operated by an American company called Pro Energy down in Missouri.
Right. And so there was a lot of arcane accounting theory brought up in the hearing about this as to whether, people who actually do, auditing, consider that a valid argument. And it was decided that it wasn't, that it would still be on NB Power's books, basically. And so it was their project, regardless of how they were trying to get around it.
Right. And this is really important, I think, to all New Brunswickers because it's literally the future of energy in New Brunswick. So even though it's just in Tantramar, the plant itself is in Tantramar, all the things that we're not allowed to discuss here, such as fossil fuel burning as the worst option for the future of New Brunswick, is a 25-year contract. And it's a multi-billion-dollar project. And it's instead, it says that it's the renewable integration grid security project, but really it's like in place of the alternatives. And we can generate revenue through alternatives. Anyway, all of those things. The funny accounting did come up yesterday. Can you tell us about what the highlights from yesterday's conversation was?
Sure. And what you just said is the reason, for all those reasons as you just mentioned that we, aren't going to get discussed here, still remain really important. So yesterday, there was a lot of information it was a cross-examination of NB Power's evidence yesterday. And the first person out of the door to do that cross-examination was from the Conservation Council. Unfortunately, we only had a few questions from her, excuse me, Ms. Northrup, before the court, the hearing had to go into what they call in-camera session, which means that there was confidential, mostly financial information that couldn't be disclosed. So therefore, they had to go into secret session. So I don't know what happened then. We don't know. Nobody knows except the people who were there what actually happened in that session. But some of the things that did come out during her questioning was about the and also the follow-up after her. Dr. Secord, an economist from St. Thomas, asked a bunch of questions about this, is that in figuring out how much capacity we really needed, in this project, do we really need this 400 megawatts, et cetera? One of the things that came out was that they asked about demand response, which is the process of, rather than adding capacity, is you figure out ways to not need as much response. And that could be anything from heat pumps to using smart meters to time of day processing of electricity, all these different kind of things. And NB Power did admit that, well, they are doing some of that, but they actually said that, well, it's included, but it needs further study. Okay, so that's sort of an opening there, I think, that probably will be pursued by expert witnesses later this week. Another thing was that they said they didn't really consider a group of smaller projects to do this. This is sort of like, they were looking for a silver bullet, and that led them down this path. And I think that's another thing that'll probably come up for discussion. And because of that, also the cost of the system came up. And they admitted and sort of confirmed something that we heard earlier, that it will be substantially north of $1 billion probably. And that doesn't include the cost of fuel. And fuel is a big deal that we'll hear later on this week too, because if you're doing it by natural gas, it's very volatile and people are already talking about prices for natural gas over the next, as you said, it's a 25-year contract, over the next decade and beyond, they're going to go way up. So that's another area that will be pursued later on. And then today, one of the next speakers was Chris Rouse for your organization, the Chignecto Alliance, a coalition, brought out the fact that in response to another question about getting energy from New England in the wintertime, which is our crunch period, the NB Power people answered that, well, we can't really rely on that because they use so much natural gas in New England in the wintertime that there's no space left on the pipelines to get gas up here or to get energy up here. And so we're running a natural gas plant, that's supposed to protect us from shortages. And so how is this going to help our shortage? What it means is that they'll have to then, instead of burning gas up here, they'd have to burn diesel. Okay, which then this takes that into another whole realm in terms of pollution and climate change, et cetera. So they were more or less the highlights. What Chris did a lot of, he questioned for a long time, and it seemed very nitpicky. He went basically through every document they had out there, and of course, until he does his closing arguments, we won't know what his ultimate goal was. But it appears that he's looking for a couple things, which is inconsistency in the evidence itself. In other words, New Brunswick Power saying something in one report that was contradicted by something somewhere else. And two, that they didn't use all their normal processes to do this, so which is a big thing, in legal terms, the abusive process, you need to follow your own rules and standards when you're doing these kind of decisions. So he's looking for that, and also setting up some places, I think, where expert witnesses later on will be able to question the actual figures and how they were derived. Okay, so that pretty much is the highlight so far. He's going to go into this afternoon into another in-camera session. So we won't know what happens there, but right now that's pretty much the summary.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jim. I love that you mentioned that Brad Cody was referring to it as a silver bullet. I think the term he uses a lot of the time is Swiss Army knife. And we kind of went home thinking the other day, like, have you ever actually done anything useful with the Swiss Army knife? Like, I feel like it's pretty useless, actually. It like has all these like fancy little functions on it, but then it's basically a stranded asset in your junk drawer. Like, do you have it with you all the time? It was a nice gift. It was a nice thought, and we love Switzerland, and that's great. But we don't really need a big old
unless you did a wine opener on a camping trip.
A wine opener is way more useful. If that was.
But anyway,
thank you, Jim, for your time.
Let me give you one more thing. There is that just that what happened a lot with this nitpicking by Chris on all these different little things is the NB Power was doing a lot of conditional statements and sort of I don't know what you call them, fuzzy replies, trying to provide context for what they were saying, as opposed to just saying, yes, we did this, no, we do that. So how successful they are in reframing the questions, we all know until the board makes its decision, but that seems to be the direction that Mr. Rouse was going in.
Absolutely. And you're right. Like all of those things are now on record. All of their answers are now on record, and we'll hear in the final case. And I think maybe coming up soon is a public intervener, so that should be really interesting as well.
Yeah, be the first of the experts.
Will try to give you a call in roughly 24 hours for another update.
Okay, take care.
Thank you, Jim. Bye.
Bye.